Hello ladies and gentleframes, the Oraxia hype train is a gift that keeps on giving because we just got another update. This time they showed actual gameplay of her 4 abilities, and this clip answers basically all the questions that I still had after my last ability analysis. So in this update video right here, we're gonna take a look at it, go over what that means for Oraxia, and why she's probably even stronger than I initially thought. Big shoutouts to all the generous channel members as always, and now let's jump right into it. Alright, first things first, her passive, making you invisible for 8 seconds upon wall latch. My question in my last video was, is this refreshable while the invisibility is still on? And in the background we can clearly see, yes, it refreshes, meaning it should be pretty darn easy to stay constantly invisible with her, which is very nice. The biggest surprise for me though was the first ability. You know, you jump at an enemy with your spider legs, and when you kill them you get health and energy out of them. My concern in the last video was that you only get the drops out of them if you manage to kill them with the very ability cast, and I thought in higher level content, when the enemies get tankier, usually ability damage doesn't scale all that well, so it might be useless. But what was not obvious from the ability description is that this thing is actually scripted to be an insta-kill. See, what Pablo said is, what you need to do is lower the enemy health to half, and then they will have a little symbol over their head, and when you cast this ability on an enemy with this symbol, it will just insta-kill them regardless of their level. That is of course very great, meaning your first ability will scale regardless of enemy level, and as we can also see in the background right here, with Equilibrium, Pablo gets quite some juice out of these enemies. So yeah, essentially, any enemy that you can take out with your weapon is an enemy that you can also take out with your first ability, meaning energy sustain should be no problem whatsoever with Madam Spiderframe here. Ability number 2 is basically exactly what I said it would be, right? I said it's probably gonna be like Caliban's crowd control, and yeah, this is Caliban's crowd control just with a spiderweb skin on top. One thing to note here though is that it doesn't instantly create the full AoE. You can see that the AoE expands a little bit before it reaches its maximum. And my question here would be, does the range scale with ability range, like on most frames, or with ability duration, like for Novas 4 for example? Because similar to Novas 4, right, also this here expands over time, so it might be that ability duration would actually be the stat to go for here. I guess we'll have to see. Now, what really surprised me though is her third skill. From the text, it wasn't really all that clear what scuttlers are. Now we have clarity. You spawn tiny little spiderlings, and it seems like Oraxia can very comfortably be played as a summoner type of Warframe, because from all I can tell, these steel path enemies seem to go down pretty darn quickly from your little friends. So yeah, if you want to be like a Beastmaster Summoner Oraxia, where your little spider family kills all the enemies for you while you're hanging somewhere on a wall cheering them on, that is 100% possible. In fact, I think if you want to play her like that, you will probably use her entire kit and not need a helmet ability to begin with. However, if you rather go to town with your guns and don't really use the spiderlings, then I still think your 3 is probably going to be what you subsume over with something else. And then finally, her 4th ability, the spider legs. First of all, as we can see, the health bonus that she gets in this form is actually quite significant, right? She has a lot of health, and that was also not clear before, your wall latch duration in this form will be infinite, so you never fall down. Synergizes very nicely with your passive because you can zip from wall to wall, keep the invisibility up constantly, a very active and strong playstyle. And as we can also see, yes, Arcane Crepuscular works. Pablo uses it in this very gameplay. Arcane Arachne works. Pablo also uses that in the gameplay, which shows that probably every mod and every effect that is on wall latch will most likely also work very well with Oraxia. And one feature with this that was also previously not clear is that, in fact, yes, your 4th ability is a channeled ability. We can clearly see that it drains energy over time. It does not have a duration. So when it comes to energy sustain, stuff like Energy Siphon, Energy Nexus, stuff that refills energy over time will not be viable. You'll have to go for Equilibrium, Arcane Energize, and stuff like that. And because you're invisible, not only can you use Arcane Crepuscular, but also, as I said in my last video, Spectral Serration on your rifle, giving you much more damage and opening up your Arcane slot to go for something else than base damage in there. But not just that, there's even more I have to say about her 4th ability right here, and that is something that we will spot once we take a look at the ammo counter in the bottom right of the screen. Remember how the skill says that it gives toxin damage to your weapons? Well, At first, I thought that would probably be a toxin infusion, similar to Vault Shock Trooper gives an electric infusion, but looking at how this is displayed right here, that looks very much like Side09's ammo ability that gives you different elemental ammo, and that means that it's very much possible that Oraxia's toxin infusion is in fact gonna be something like Toxic Lash, where your weapon is technically not infused with that element, but it is handled like with Side09, where for every bullet you fire, you get a separate damage instance, that being toxin. In case that's true, that would be incredibly strong, especially if you combine it with a weapon like, let's say, the Recon Effects, which also has a mechanic that does something similar. And another thing that we need to remember that had very broken interactions in the past and might as well do something similar here would be Zaku's Zata's Whisper as a helmet ability. You know, with Toxic Lash Zata's Whisper, that's a long history, so maybe we see something similar with Oraxia here. I can't wait to try it out. And as always, if you could maybe leave a quick like for the video, that'll be amazing because it always helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm. Cheers so much for your support. So much for the abilities, let's also quickly go over the build options again. First of all, as I also said in the last one, Archon Continuity will be an absolute must here. Inflicting Corrosive whenever you inflict Toxin, that's gonna be very nice, especially also with your Scuttlers, because from what I can tell from the gameplay, it appears that the Scuttlers actually deal Toxin damage and inflict Toxin status, and were that to be the case, then that means they would do quite some armor stripping when using Archon Continuity, so definitely use that. Go for 1 or 2 green Archon charts so you can full strip on just Corrosive alone. Then, naturally, Arcane Crepuscular, right? Because you're probably going to be constantly invisible. However, given how much health she gets in her 4th form, it might also be possible to play her as a health tank very comfortably. So everything that goes for a health tank, health, armor, adaptation, will probably also be viable if you rather do that than play for constant invisibility. But one thing I forgot to mention in the last video is Arcane Kamisado is of course going to be completely awesome here, giving you even more ability strength and making your Scuttlers quicker, because I'm pretty sure that the Scuttlers will qualify for this Arcane to trigger. Then, as I also said earlier, Equilibrium is probably going to be a must for her, because with your first ability you get health and energy, and with Equilibrium that means full energy. And if you want to go for the Summoner playstyle, of course, you're probably going to go with Summoner's Wrath in the Aura, because it will give much more damage to your little Scuttlers. But yeah, what do you think about her kit? Let us know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, definitely also check out my last Oraxia video. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanyo 2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murazaki, Damon, Shadow Lockhart, Troller Loxon, Kiski, Hantakas, Patrisator, Christopher S. Mawson, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot and have a nice weekend.